Hello and welcome to AUA Focus Series, a podcast channel by AUA Media Lab. My name is Yevgenya Jenny Paturyan. Today I have the pleasure of hosting Dr. Laura Luciani. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the Ghent Institute for International European Studies. Dr. Luciani's research interests are actually quite broad, but they're focused on South Caucasus. I hope we'll get a chance to talk about it today more. But just to give you a taste, she's looking at human rights, she's looking at security and insecurity in this region, democratization processes, post-colonial narratives, civil society, a whole lot of super interesting topics. And Dr. Luciani, it's a pleasure to host you here. You have experience with our region. You told me this is your 7th visit to Armenia. You've been to Georgia, you volunteered there, you wrote about Azerbaijan and its shrinking space for civil society. But first, I want us to start with a broader question about not just you, but also the group. You're here with the group. So let's start with that. What brings you and your colleagues to Armenia?
First of all, thank you very much, Jenny, for hosting me in this podcast. It's a pleasure to be at the American University of Armenia. Indeed, as you said, this is not my first time here in the country, but I'm here for the first time with a delegation of colleagues from Ghent University, from Belgium. So we're here as part of a delegation supported by the Jurist platform of our university. So this is a regional platform that seeks to foster academic cooperation between Ghent University and universities in Eastern Europe, South Caucasus, and Central Asia. And so the goal of our visit here in Armenia is to explore opportunities for cooperation with local universities, and we try to see if there are opportunities to foster, for example, staff exchanges or student exchanges between Ghent University and AUA, for example, and other institutions here, and to also see if we can maybe set up joint research projects with colleagues from Armenia. So as a postdoctoral researcher at Ghent University in the political science department, it's also in my personal interest and professional interest to be part of this mission, and I take it as an opportunity to expand my professional network. And I'm also very happy actually to be here and doing this podcast with you, given that I'm familiar with your research and I've read some of your publications.
All right, thanks. So you're not just visiting AUA, right? You're visiting a number of universities here, and then you're going to Georgia.
Yes, so we are visiting a number of universities in Yerevan, the Yerevan State University, the National Academy of Sciences. Yesterday we had a meeting with the Ministry of Education. And then, yes, on tomorrow afternoon, we're traveling to Tbilisi and we're having several meetings for similar purposes there.
So, and it's not just social sciences, right? Your group is pretty diverse. There are people from various areas. So
exactly, yeah. So we're a group of 8 colleagues from different faculties of our university. So we have law and criminology, we have the social sciences, geography, colleague from the medical faculty as well. So it's a quite diverse group. Linguistics.
Right. I think it's great for Armenia. We need these opportunities to open up to the world and also show the world that there's something interesting. And of course, in terms of political science, I mean, this place is a living lab. Yeah, it's just so things are happening and worth researching. And any plans to go to Azerbaijan? Actually, we're not at this point in time.
Yeah, we haven't considered that opportunity. I think that there is a lot to say about academic freedom in Azerbaijan, and therefore, I guess it's not a good idea to just, plan a mission for academic cooperation in the current political context in the country. Yeah.
Well, I have to say that I like what I'm hearing, not because I'm against collaboration with Azerbaijan or anything like that. But what I found strange in the past is this one approach to all 3 countries. It's almost like we often feel like when somebody looks at us from the outside, they're like, South Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia. Yeah, but these 3 countries are so different. So it's good to hear that these differences are starting to sink in, and there's this artificial, let's just do all 3 kind of thing is kind of weakening, I hope. But it's also hope that one day our colleagues in Azerbaijan get the freedom to do academic research and collaborate and don't be left out.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Let's move to the next question is, so civil society, you work on civil society, I work on civil society. It's a very popular term. It's even like a catchy word. We use it, we misuse it, politicians use it, all kinds of people use it. How would you define it? How would you, for a general public, people who love maybe hearing the word or, think, what on earth does that mean? How would you define civil society?
Yeah, this is a very good and a very broad question at the same time. I think we could have a whole podcast just about civil society. And of course, civil society is what in the social sciences we like to call a contested concept, right? So asking for a definition of it is by default a difficult task. So I think the most popular definition would be, civil society is a sphere of social action, of collective action, of socio-political organizing. Some people like to define civil society as a sphere which is different at the same time from the state, from the political sphere, and from the market, from the economic realm. But of course, there has been criticism of this definition, and we see and we know that there are many interlocking relations of power between civil society and the political and the economic realm. And there's also, of course, a lot of debates about what does civil society actually cover, who is included in civil society, who is excluded by this label. And it is also a label that it is mobilized by actors in different ways. Some actors, some non-governmental organizations, human rights defenders, pro-democracy actors might actually reclaim the term civil society as something that gives them legitimacy, so to present themselves vis-a-vis the international community or the general public in a certain way. But then there are also actors that are still working in this realm of socio-political organizing, of collective action, that actually refuse the label civil society because this label is associated with certain normative aspects, certain liberal values, certain westernized understanding of what civil society is that they don't agree with. Right. So the way why I got interested in this concept to start with is that I did my PhD thesis in European studies in the field of actually European Union studies, to be more specific. And civil society is really a buzzword in this field because it is a term that the European Union mobilizes a lot in its foreign policy as basically a term for everything that is good. Like civil society is the good guys. Civil society is the vector for democratization. We have to foster civil society to have a developed, democratic, prosperous society. And big part of the policies of the European Union is about funding civil society abroad, including in the South Caucasus and in the former Soviet region. And of course, from a critical standpoint, we know that civil society in these parts of the world has also been fostered and in a way created by international organizations, international development agencies as a tool to push for a certain transformation of this region, right? So it was a concept that was very much in vogue after the collapse of the Soviet Union as, again, a means for the democratization, for the transition to the free market economy of this region. And it became associated with, again, all these good ideas of democratization, but there was a disconnect and a gap that was created between the civil society supported by the donors, by Western governments, and the actual population and their needs that were not taken into account really by the programs that were aimed at fostering the liberal civil society. And so I think today it's still relevant to talk about civil society because even though many things have changed in this region, it still remains, in a way, a tool for a certain ordering of this region, if we look at civil society from the perspective of, again, the European Union or Western governments. But at the same time, we also see that civil society in the South Caucasus, and we see it very much now in the case of Georgia, for instance, has become also a terrain of geopolitical contestation, where we see that these ideas of liberal democracy, democracy promotion are being very much contested, and restricting civil society, restricting the space for civil society is actually a way of contesting and for states that are turning authoritarian also to present themselves differently on the global stage. And again, I think we should not look at civil society only as a means for Western donors to pursue certain foreign policy goals, but also as a terrain where these dominant orders can be reinterpreted, they can be contested, and from where certain alternatives can also emerge. And so this is why I think it's a very interesting object of research, and this is why I still continue to study civil society, even though from a less, let's say, EU-centric perspective nowadays.
Yes, I'm here. I keep thinking it's going to go out of fashion. It's such a fuzzy, complex term, but it's still there. And I guess because it just evokes some kind of emotions in people. It's interesting that in Armenia we had, to my eyes as a scholar who studied Armenian civil society, we had a bit of a story of NGOization in the early period, obviously understandable. But then somewhere around 2008, I would say approximately, there's been this movement by activists rather than NGOs, groups of people, often very young, diverse, who would then actually say, we are the civil society. So there was this attempt to reclaim and broaden and complicate a complex thing, which was kind of like oversimplified. And you talk about it in your research as well, how they say civil society, but they understand NGOs. And that's just such an empowering understanding, as civil society is just so much more diverse and broad and healthy if it's not just NGOs. All right. Another concept that I picked from your work and got very excited about is neocolonialism. I believe that's fundamentally important, and we don't talk enough about it in Armenia. I don't know anyone who seriously talks about neocolonialism here. So maybe you could start that conversation. What is neocolonialism? How would you explain it to a first-year student, for example?
Yeah, so I think there is quite a good definition of neocolonialism that is defined as an arrangement whereby a state in the global south is, let's say, politically independent, has this sort of formal independence from the previous colonizer. And this is the case, for example, of African states that were colonized by Western governments. So after decolonization, they got this formally political independence, but they continued to be economically subordinated and subservient to the northern capital, so the interests of the former colonizers, right? So, of course, this definition that I'm taking is something that has been proposed for a specific historical and political context, as I said, of the former African colonies. And it is not something that I think can be applied in the same way or copy-pasted simply to the Armenian context. But actually, because you mentioned that not many people speak about neocolonialism in Armenia, I took this concept, the way I got interested in this concept was actually by talking to some Armenian feminist activists and environmental activists. Because I think this was a conversation that this group of people in Armenia started to have just around the Velvet Revolution, so in 2018 and right after, when there was a mobilization to prevent the opening of the gold mine in Amulsar. And so I was following these developments. Actually, 2018 was the year that I started to do my PhD, so it was kind of my first visit to Armenia as a researcher, and I was trying to interact with this group and trying to understand. I was trying to understand how they framed and how they interpreted human rights. But of course, then I realized that, again, there's a lot of criticism and a lot of different interpretation that can be given of human rights as a concept. And human rights promotion was not something that was very much interesting to these more leftist or feminist, radical activists who were more concerned with questions of neocolonialism, for example. And so in the case of Armenia, I think when we think of extractivism and extractive policies in the field of mining, for example, it's something that is visible in how metal mines are owned mostly by foreign shareholders, foreign companies. They are mostly Russian, but there's also Western capital involved in metal mining in Armenia. And so in a way, we see that there is this pattern whereby the former imperial power, Russia, is still basically owning 90% or a very, very big share of the mining field in Armenia, so sort of reproducing this dependency, right? So I think there is an element of neocolonialism there, but there is also an element of neocolonialism linked to extractivism when we think that, as Armenia Ishkanyan has written in her work, that mining and the development of the mining industry in Armenia after the collapse of the Soviet Union was, in a way, promoted by Western development agencies, the World Bank and others, as a way to foster a certain growth of the economy, as a strategy for poverty reduction. But of course, this was not supposed to be, mines were not supposed to be owned by the Armenian state. They were supposed to be made private, and investors were supposed to come to sort of benefit from it. So this is why I am using this term in this specific
fascinating.
context.
I have to say my interest in neocolonialism started with my friendship with American Indian indigenous activists. And their take is what I got out of there was more psychological, kind of like what's in our heads. And in that sense, I think, so two very different perspectives, right? Economic perspective. And here it's more about why do Armenians continue thinking in a certain way? Like what part of it is a result of layers and layers and layers of colonialism that these people have experienced for thousands of years. So I hope some young researchers and students are listening and getting inspirations, because I would love to see both research continuation of what Armenia Ishkanyan is doing on kind of economic side of neocolonialism, but also the psychological side of neocolonialism and kind of self-depreciation. That's a very Armenian narrative that is, I firmly believe, is part of the colonial narrative of who are you? Keep your head low. What are you? Anyways, a very hot contemporary political topic. Interesting things happening in the United States. Very interesting signals coming from the White House. Some say this is a major tectonic shift in the world power relationship in the world, in kind of like in structure of international organizations, human rights narrative. What are your takes on that? What is current Trump's administration's position on democracy, human rights, peace, all these things? What does that mean for Europe in general? And what does that mean for Europe's role in our region here in Armenia? What is your take on this security issue?
Well, I think to start with, it's quite hard to assess these developments because it's very unpredictable. I think unpredictability is really the feature of the Trump presidency at the moment. So we see that every day there is new developments going on. But of course, some of them are already having very concrete effects. And, if we think about democratization or human rights policies, the ban on USAID and the freeze of USAID funding is already having quite a big impact, and especially in this region. And we just had a guided tour of the AUA premises, and we learned that some of the programs that were funded by USAID to support the expansion of your university are also now under threat. So, of course, we see that this is very, very problematic. So when it comes to how this is affecting the EU's position and especially the EU's policies in the South Caucasus, I think in a way the shift in the US policies is going to accelerate some of the processes that are already ongoing when it comes to the EU's foreign policy positioning and security positioning on the global stage. So we have seen already for almost 10 years that the EU is trying to take a more assertive, let's say, stance in foreign policy, to present itself as a more security conscious, a more strategic actor on the global stage. There is this idea that the international liberal order is under threat, and that, norms promotion is no longer enough for the EU, to exert some influence in the world. And so there is a need for the EU to be a geopolitical actor, whatever that means. And I think that this, in a way, has a couple of problematic implications that we are already seeing in the South Caucasus. So on the one hand, this idea of a geopolitical EU, I think it's going to come at the expense of certain concerns about human rights and justice. And I think the way in which the EU has been engaged, for example, in Armenia or in the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict after the 2020 war, because before it wasn't very much engaged, has shown that despite all talks about values and norms and democracies, we have seen the way in which they have still prioritized certain short-sighted geostrategic interests, for example, in striking a gas deal with Azerbaijan to replace Russian gas supplies. And on the other hand, the EU is still trying to maintain this sort of normative, we could say, image. And it is doing that also by emphasizing its specificity as in a civilizational way. I think, sort of reinstating and emphasizing this idea of Europe as the one that knows best, this primate of Europe, in the primacy of Europe in the international stage. And I'm very concerned, to be honest, about what this means, because at the moment we're seeing calls for militarization, remilitarization of the EU, and even in my country, where there are there is a contestation about this militarism and militarization. Those who are not in favor of outright sort of increasing the military spending to defend Europe against, the bad guys, Russia and China, they do so using this very civilizationist approach, like, oh no, Europe, we are different, but we are also the best. And it is very colonial and very neo-colonial approach. So again, I don't have all the elements to foresee, what's going to happen with the EU's engagement in this region, but I think definitely we're going to see an exacerbation of this geopoliticization processes that, to me, are quite concerning.
But also these are universal human values. These are not necessarily European values. These are the values that Europe has earned through a hard struggle and turbulent history and can, I think, be proud of. But yeah, it's time to wrap up. We can talk about it forever, but this kind of just, I wanted to add on that note of appreciating self-criticism. So thank you very much for a fascinating conversation. I hope maybe to have another chance at some point. And thank you for AUA Media Lab for hosting this. And
thank you very much, Jenny, for asking so many interesting questions. And it was really a pleasure to have this talk with you.
I like that.